Hello and welcome to our exciting new episode of Consult the Doctor. Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem. I thought that today we'd go over 4 more questions that I have recently received. Number 1. Do you have any suggestions on how to repair a Lamy Safari clip when it becomes loose? I can tell you the first part, but not the second. This is a Lamy Safari. It has this little finial on top, and that finial looks like it is something that would easily fit a screwdriver, but you can screw as long as you want. Nothing happens. So what you do is you take an object like this pencil, maybe this pen, for example, and you kind of want to stick that in and push out that finial. Now, if I hold it in front of my ever-increasing forehead, you'll see that it has kind of like a little push nub button in it. And then out comes the inner cap, which is actually a somewhat rubberized material, which I've probably stretched out a bit now. And the idea is that you have that inner cap, and then you have the cap. This would be on the inside, but if I put it on the inside, you can't see it, can you? So it would go about there, right? All the way at the top of the cap. This is inside the cap. This is outside the cap, and they kind of connect like that. You have to push a little bit, but that holds the two parts together, which is actually a pretty clever design, I find. All right, now, then you look inside here, and I don't know how well you can see this, but the clip is there, and it comes out. It's a lot easier than it looks. Be a little careful not to bend anything. It just has these 2 prongs, and they go into little holes, and that's pretty much it. Now, how you would tighten that when it's become loose, you see, it's not particularly difficult. I should have had Hamish do this. No, sit back and have yourself some haggis. But anyway, that's the idea, and then maybe you can bend it a bit. I would be very careful, because I would be afraid that I would be more or less bending the hell out of it and destroying it. Anyway, then, but you know, people who know what they're doing with kind of metalwork type stuff, I'm not one of those people, they might be able to give you better advice. So then when you're done, you kind of use it. This is a nice tool. It's just a letter opener. It's actually a Laban letter opener they sent me, which is very sweet. You kind of push this back in. I know you can hardly see this. Anyway, there's a hole in the cap, and I now make sure that nipple is kind of almost poking through a little bit, and then on top of that will click. I'm kind of holding this into place here. Should click that finial. And I'm not exactly doing a great job at this. Fiddling with B.R.E. Brown. Okay, I think I have it. Yeah, that seemed to click into place. So now the finial is back into place. It's not particularly aligned. Now this probably stretched out a bit. Yeah, that's definitely stretched out a bit. Less purchase than it used to have, but this is my knockabout Safari for these kinds of demonstrations, so that is fine. Okay, I hope that helps. The next question is about the M800 or M1000. Can this pen be inked with an eyedropper when you unscrew the nib unit? The short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is yes, but why? But I'm sure there was a good... Oh, godverdomme, mijn hele thee staat hier te trekken. I completely forgot about my tea. You didn't hear me swear in Dutch. Straffe bak! Okay, why would you do that? Why would you not swear in Dutch? Why would you take off a nib unit and then fill the pen with an eyedropper? I suppose so that you don't stain a section or you don't get ink on the section. But understand the procedure, right? When you have a piston filler, this is not one of them, you dip it into a bottle of ink, you operate the piston, that draws up ink, but at the same time it primes the nib and the feed. Then you're supposed to wipe off the section, the nib and feed, and you're supposed to do maybe a turn or 2 turns, expel, probably not 2 turns, most pens expel 2 or 3 drops of ink. And then it's not overfilled, the pen and the nib and feed are primed. So then you can immediately write. Now, if you don't take that priming step, then you can ink up the pen. You can do this, for example, when you do dip it in the pen into a bottle of ink. You use the piston, but then you completely drain the feed with just a very absorbent tissue, and then it doesn't write straight away. That's because the feed is no longer truly primed, and then you have a hard start, for example. So I understand that you might want to not stain your pen or get ink on the section or get messy hands or all that stuff, and maybe use an eyedropper, but you remove the option really to get the nib and feed primed straight away. And in my mind, that would be a downside, really, because it means that you can't start writing straight away. And I would rather have somewhat messy hands than have a pen that I then have to fiddle with to get it to write. But that's me, right? I hope that answers your question. Next question is, have you ever had a pen that was too wet? Did you mitigate this with any dry inks? If so, do you have any recommendations? How can anything be too wet? When talking about pens, it does happen. It can happen that a pen is so wet that it's almost too much. I have that, for example, with my Koenig king size, the double broad nib. That is a very, very wet 14K nib. Now, I love that, but it's not for everyone. In that case, I would say you have two options. The most complicated option is find a nibmeister and have your nib made drier, which is doable. They can constrain the ink flow a bit, constrict the ink flow a bit. Sorry, it's been a long day. I was teaching statistics at 8 a.m. That makes things very interesting. Okay, the other thing you can do is, of course, use dry ink, and that's I'm assuming, given the way the question was asked, that's what the querier, the questioner, the person who asked the question was asking about. There are some dry inks, and one of my favorites is probably Germain Lit de Thé. Very nice ink, truly tea-colored. Speaking of, yeah, that's wrong. Lit de Thé is very nice, but it's very dry, and that makes it an interesting ink to pair with a pen that you may deem too wet. And then you may have a pen that's more to your liking. For a more permanent solution, and in my mind a more satisfying solution, I would go to a nibmeister. If it's a pen that you truly love, I would do that, simply because then you can use any ink you like, and that's kind of the fun in fountain pens, right? But if you don't want to go through that effort, or it's not easy where you live, or anything of that along those lines, I fully understand too. And in such a case, a dry ink like Lit de Thé may be good. I also used way back when I used Noodler's Whaler Sepia, which is pretty much like putting sand in your pen. That is so incredibly dry that it whatever you put it in almost grinds to a halt. I would not necessarily recommend that, simply because to me it was a bit too much. But, interesting. Okay, the final question I have today is one that I found a question to be very, very dear to my heart, really. Does it matter that I can't afford expensive pens? I only have a Pilot Metropolitan, and I feel that I may be missing out. There should be absolutely no shame in not having expensive pens. Fountain pens are supposed to be fun, and you should enjoy using them. And if that means that you have to sell your car to buy a pen, then I think there may be something wrong with you. That is not what you would want, what I would want anyone to do. And I think that there is nothing wrong with the Pilot Metropolitan. Here's one. There's nothing wrong with the Lamy Safari. There's nothing wrong with any of those pens. There is something wrong with giving people the feeling that they need to spend a fortune on a fountain pen to be a real fountain pen user. Because it's simply not true. You don't have to purchase an expensive pen to be a fountain pen user. It could be a $5 Chinese pen, and that can be your one pen, a pen that you really enjoy. There is for sure a segment of people in the fountain pen world who would say, no, that's not true. Unless you have a $500 pen, a $1,000 pen, or whatever, a $10,000 pen, you're not really a player in the fountain pen world. My personal answer to that would be screw that. Everybody should be able to enjoy whatever they have, whatever they can afford, and they should be supported in doing so. Okay? This is, like any hobby, a matter of keeping that hobby a safe place for everyone, where everyone feels welcome. Now, the next question that then invariably arises is, but then what's the point in expensive pens? Yeah, what's the point in expensive cars? What's the point in expensive shoes, in expensive suits, in expensive coats, in expensive gas stoves, in expensive etc.? Sometimes, to a degree, you purchase more functionality. A fancier filling system than just cartridges and converters. A nib of a more exclusive material, like gold, like titanium, something that's rhodium plated, something that whatever. Something fancier, right? But that doesn't mean that what you own, that is only a Pilot Metropolitan, that is only a Safari or whatever, is any less interesting, less good, less anything. It's just not. I do think there is that tipping point, and I don't know exactly where that lies in price, but there is a tipping point where you're really buying a name, just like with clothes. That the quality of expensive clothes may be better than the quality of cheap clothes, and you may get some more expensive materials that were used, etc. As I just said, with pens, the same thing. You may get a gold nib, but you may get a fancier filling system. At some point, there's a tipping point, though, where you're really only paying for the name of the brand, or you're only paying for the prestige. Because what gets added by that extra $200 or $300 really is absolutely microscopic and minimal. Does it matter that a pen has a gold nib? It matters in certain ways. A gold nib is more corrosion resistant than even a stainless steel nib. A gold nib often, but not always, has a little bit more bounce to it. It's a little bit softer. Some people find that very attractive. A fun filling system may be a lot of fun, may be different, etc. But at the end of the day, some of the prices that are asked for pens are, at this point, astronomical and ludicrous. And I don't fully understand that. Having said that, this was a bit of a rant, but I think it's an important point. Everyone in the pen world should be made to feel welcome, and you should not only be welcome if you can afford $1,000 pens or whatever. I think that is it's just wrong. It's wrong to approach this as a hobby, and I think that if fountain pen users give you the feeling that you don't really belong because you only have an inexpensive pen, and I have seen this in people at pen shows, I've seen this in people at pen meets, where they were almost apologetic for, well, I'm sorry, I only have 2 TWSBIs. But don't goddamn apologize. That's fine. Nobody should make fun of you. Nobody should be upset with you. And nobody should belittle you if that is what you can afford. In fact, I think you can have a lot of fun with a TWSBI, or with a $5 Chinese pen, or with whatever you have. And I think we should maybe sometimes do a better job at making everyone feel welcome, and not give the impression that unless you have X pen, you just don't belong here. Because that's wrong. And I'm sorry if this sounded a bit ranty, and if it was probably longer as an answer than it should have been. But I think it's a very important point, and I really think it is important to point that out once in a while, that it's there should be a safe space, not a space where people get judged for how much they've spent on pens. sometimes you should be judged a little bit for what you spend on pens, but then it's the other way around. And it's about having spent a lot on pens. I think that is more worthy of being judged than having spent not so much on pens. And I say this more or less tongue-in-cheek, but I think you know what I mean. Okay, I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Please leave any further questions below so that I can address them in a future episode of Consult the Doctor. Cheers!